TV is still functional, and yet it's still got a few issues, doesn't it? Some of you are like, what on earth is going on with the TV on the stage if you were not here last week? Yeah, it's not yet fully restored, is it? And we know the tension, don't we? If you missed last week or have not yet seen the teaching video from last week, I spent a portion of last week going through a story as to why the 65-inch LCD TV that is now blinking kind of at us is a shattered mess beyond repair, and what I had personally to do with that, because actually I had everything to do with why that TV now sits staring at us, a broken and a shattered mess. I don't have time to go into that story again. You'll have to go back and watch that video, but this is our working metaphor. At this point in our journey, a metaphor for those parts of our lives, right, that may feel or seem a bit like that TV. They're just a mess. It's like shattered beyond repair. They may be functional, right? We're like, yeah, it kind of works, but it's got some major issues. It's not yet fully restored. And so I don't know if you're like me and you live with this deep sense that from time to time, or maybe all the time, I don't know, that there's just something in you that may seem like it's a bit off. It's just not where you're wanting that part, that issue, that relationship, that way you deal with those people. It's not the way that you want it to be. It needs a bit of fixing. Oh, and I'll have you know, that is not the first nor the most expensive piece of church technological equipment that I have personally destroyed for this church. Some of you may remember, I don't know, when was it? About 10 years ago, we were having a men's ministry event at Sandwich City that was run at that time in downtown Covina, owned by Alan and Laura Short, you may remember. And we were having a men's ministry event there, and it included some worship, and Rainier went there and brought his worship team, including our big church soundboard. I happened to bring my old red pickup truck as well, and Rainier was needing some help to move the soundboard back to our facility at that time, and so I had the truck and I volunteered, and we carefully loaded that large, expensive soundboard into the back of my red pickup truck, and I said, I'll meet you back at our old facility there in downtown Glendora. And so I was leaving downtown Covina going north on Citrus. Some of you picture it in your mind, right? Over the railroad tracks, north on Citrus. I get to APU. How many of you know that large right turn where Citrus becomes Foothill Boulevard, right by Citrus College? You know the one? The one that now has a stoplight because of the Gold Line, but 10 years ago there was no stoplight, and there was no stopping me taking that turn. And so absolutely, completely forgetting what I was carrying in the back of the red truck, I took that turn a little hot. And by a little hot, think like NASCAR turn 4 at Talladega. And suddenly I hear another ominous crash, not unlike that TV about a month ago, crashing in this room. And I look in the rearview mirror, and what do I see? Bouncing along Foothill Boulevard is our church soundboard. Little tiny knobs flying everywhere. The entire church soundboard is bouncing at about 40 miles an hour down Foothill Boulevard. I pull the truck over, I jump out, and I run to, I'm cradling the soundboard in my arms, and I load it back in the truck, and I'm literally playing Frogger, trying to pick up little tiny as many little knobs as I can stuff in my pocket as cars are whizzing by on Foothill Boulevard. And I finally get as many knobs as I can get, and I throw the soundboard in the back of the truck, and I meet Rainier over where I told him I would meet him. And as I pulled up, I got out and I said, "There's been an accident. I'm okay. Don't worry, Rainier, I'm fine. Nobody else was hurt in the accident." Notice I didn't say nothing else was hurt. I said nobody else was hurt in the accident. I said, but our church soundboard, it's gone. It didn't make it. And I show him the back of the truck, this obliterated soundboard. And so I guess the moral of that story And the moral of the story that I told last week, which entails why that TV on the stage is shattered, and maybe the bigger question that both stories beg is why I continue to be entrusted with moving expensive church technological equipment, right? I mean, somebody else needs to take this role from me because I just continue to obliterate things and create absolute messes. So there you go. Well, last week, really these stories, I asked the question, how many of us can kind of relate? You've taken the turn a little too hot and suddenly there's a crash. You were just trying to do something good and move a screen and it suddenly crashes. Most of us can relate in some way. Anybody who's had, or perhaps you continue to have, one of those "are you kidding me" moments, or even seasons of life. Anybody who's been told that something about you, or maybe something about others, that's broken. And it's not just broken, as they told me about the TV, it's broken beyond repair. Like, there really is no redemption. There really is no fixing this. And this week and last week were really for anybody who's just in need, who finds themselves in a place like that and is in need of a fresh word of hope, a fresh word of redemption in the midst of the brokenness. And so we kind of got at this going back to our series. We're in the book of Haggai, and we're kind of starting to round a corner, not too quickly, but we're rounding a corner toward the end of this study. And we looked at 3 questions last week that Haggai poses to this struggling, fledgling community that's trying to find its way forward, trying to find its identity after what's really amounts to like a national, international embarrassment. Lots of brokenness. I mean, this is a community that can, in so many ways, relate to that metaphor. And these 3 questions, really they call for an honest assessment. Not of what was or what used to be, but what is at present. And we said last week that for us today, I think an honest assessment seems to be the way forward. So these 3 questions, let me put them on the screen again. This is at the end of Haggai chapter 2. They're in yellow on the screen. Haggai asks, "Who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory?" This house being the temple, right? The house of God. That would have been back to Solomon's temple, built sometime around 1000 BC. Which stood for hundreds and hundreds of years before it was burned to the ground by the Babylonians. Haggai asks, who saw that temple in its former glory? And then the second question, how's it look to you now? And then really the rhetorical question, to prove a point, is that third and final question, where Haggai asks, does it now or not seem to you like nothing? And last week we said that this idea of comparison, the way it was compared to the way it is now, that comparison, it has some value, yes. But if you stay there, or if we allow ourselves to stay there, always comparing how it was to how it is, that has a way of in some ways cementing our reality, doesn't it? Comparison has a way, if we stay there, of cementing our reality, of becoming the life that we settle for, the family dynamics that we settle for, the marriage that we settle for, the friendships that we settle for, the job that we settle for, whatever it might be. That comparison in some ways is good. Honest assessment can have a lot of value, can't it? Assessing what is. It has some value. It's an important component, we could say, if we're ever going to move forward. But if we stay there, if we get stuck there, which so many of us do, then it has a way of cementing our reality. We just settle for this is the way it's going to be. It's functional, right? We said, I guess it works. I guess it's functional. But if we're honest, we know it's not fully restored. It could be so much better. This is not what I intended for my life. This is not what I intended for us, whatever it might be. And so we said last week that when we come to that point, we face a choice. The Israelites at this time in history, they faced a choice. And I would submit to you that we face the same choice today. And that choice is we can either let it continue to be the nothing that it may seem to be. We can do that. We can just settle for it. We say, this is just the way it is. It's nothing. It's going to be nothing. We can settle for the nothing, which does it not seem to you like nothing? Yeah, sure. We stay there. We settle there. We can linger there. Or we can choose, as he continues to say, to be strong in verse 4, and to do and to begin to work on making it something. Something that it will involve, doing the hard work, as Haggai says, trusting that God is with us so that we have nothing to fear. And when we have nothing to fear, we have nothing to fear because we know where this goes in verse 5. We know ultimately, that God is with us and that God has a long track record of being with and giving strength to those who find themselves in very similar situations. That's why in verse 5 he ends with this. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you, so do not fear. I mean, it's like a God saying, you know what, this goes way, way back. Like this goes many, many, many generations back, centuries back, hundreds and hundreds of years back, to a different continent even. It was a different era, a different time, different generations, different people, different socio-political scene. All of that, it was entirely different. And it's as if the prophet is saying, you know what? All of that has changed, but God has not changed. God has bound himself to God's people through an eternal promise. He calls it in verse 5 a covenant. And God promises God's presence in the midst of it as we walk forward. And for us today, I hope this is some very, very good news. Well, I just want to take the next step real briefly today. Look at the next 4 verses. Because in the next 4 verses, the prophet begins to talk about what does that promise look like? If we do continue to walk forward, if we don't just stay stuck in comparison, if we're willing to do the hard work, then what will that actually look like? Look at verse 6. He says, Haggai writes, this is what the Lord Almighty says. In a little while, I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, and what is desired by all nations will come. And I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord Almighty. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says the Lord Almighty. And in this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord Almighty. That's such good news, isn't it? Such good news from a very obscure little book in the Hebrew Scriptures. What we find here, I think, and really I would say this, what we find throughout the entire Bible, throughout the Scriptures, is a relentless insistence that God is ever and always pushing forward an agenda. And I would then qualify that agenda. It is a redemptive agenda. Always, ever, throughout all times. There's this agenda. And then woven, I would take this a step further, that there is actually a pattern. If you read Genesis to Revelation, there is a pattern for how this agenda works. It's like woven into the agenda is a pattern for how restoration works, how redemption and reconciliation works, how the universe works. I would argue it that way. And here's the pattern. And see if this makes sense. It seems that the pattern is there is always a letting go of what was. I'm going to call that a death of sorts. The pattern seems to be there's a death, if you will, followed by the taking up or the picking up of something new and something life-giving. And we'll call that part of the pattern a resurrection. I mean, this is like woven into the fabric of everything, this pattern. That redemption and restoration always involves a death, doesn't it? A death of something, and then a resurrection. It always involves both a letting go and then a taking up. Now the letting go, let me talk about this for a moment. The letting go part, or I would argue the death part, it's often done in conjunction with the looking back, isn't it? So there's the letting go, and that's often done alongside with this idea of looking back, that this is how it used to be. This is how we used to be. This is how it used to look. This is how the world used to go. And so there's this looking back, and in the looking back, there's also this letting go. And part of that letting go, let's be honest about that letting go. Part of that letting go, or you could say part of the death, is the acknowledgement that, yes, something about that might not have worked. There may have been some brokenness there. There may have been even some weeping, as the Bible will often talk about, or some ashes there. There may have been, yes, some very real despair. There may have even been, in that letting go, what seemed at the time like the end. And for the community that Haggai is speaking to, that is the reality of what just happened in their national history, is it not? There was very much a death of something, a death of a national identity, a death. The temple had been destroyed. Their capital city had been ransacked just 70 years prior. There was a massive letting go. There were literal ashes that they were picking through. That was all going on. It literally fell apart and turned to ash. And for us, I don't know, perhaps some of that letting go it could be anything. It could be the letting go of a dream, could it not? Or just the way, what we thought was going to happen, or the way we thought things were going to go, or how we thought that relationship was going to turn out. I don't know what the letting go is, but we all go through that, don't we? That season of looking back, and we look back and we let go of what can't be undone. And in many ways, that feels like a what? Feels like a death. I'm having to let go of that, those expectations. That's not my reality. I have to let go of that. And it can feel like a bit of a death. But that's just the first part of the pattern. And this is woven in throughout the whole story. That's the first part. And if we stop there, there is just despair, isn't there? You can stop at that part. There's just despair, and there is no hope. We can settle for that, and many people do. But if we're willing to do the hard work, and we're willing to push forward, and we're willing to trust a covenant promise that history is actually going somewhere, and that somewhere is actually redemptive, if we're willing to do that, what we'll find is right after the letting go comes the invitation to what? Pick up something new. It's like, we let go of that thought, that way of doing things. And then there's the invitation to pick up something new and life-giving. There's actually the possibility that we could move forward into the future and find the wholeness and the purpose and the restoration that we're ultimately looking for. That there is possibility that there might actually be a new day. That weeping, it may just remain for a night, but what might we find in the morning? Joy. There may be rejoicing in the morning. That those ashes, yes, they are very, very real, but that this God is the God who brings what from ashes? Beauty. That there may actually be beauty that comes from that ash, that it's all there. And so you can call this a new day. You can call it a new beginning. Call it resurrection. Call it new creation. Call it what you want. But that's the pattern. And that's like the pattern that Haggai's tapping into, isn't he? It's the same thing. It's just over and over again throughout history. It's repeated down through the ages. I would say this, it's the way God keeps his covenant of love, which is what Haggai just got done talking about. Yeah, that's the end. It may be the end, but something new can come from that. There's this insistence, stubborn insistence that history is actually going somewhere redemptive and good. And Haggai is so confident about this that notice what he says in verse 9. It's still on the screen. Haggai is so confident that he actually says that what is to come, if we do the hard work, and if we don't get stuck, and if we push through, what will actually come will be greater and more what? More glorious, he says, than the way you think it was. I know those seemed like the glory days, right? Looking back, we look back at what was. Those seemed like the glory days, but with our God, it's actually the glory days are that way, not that way. It's actually what's ahead of you, if you'll do the work, if you'll stick with it. So says the prophet. And so after talking about this shaking everything up again, because that's really what we all need, right? How many of you just need right now more shaking in your life? You're like, yes, please, Lord, shake it up again. That's what we need. And that's what the prophet talks about here, that there's more shaking on the way. But God says that this shaking will actually result in this house, the temple that they are in fact building, to be filled with what? He says, it will be filled with his glory. And then Haggai takes it a step further and says, and promises that the future glory, it will actually be greater than the past. Now, we do not have time right now to go take a deep dive into this. I would love to. This Hebrew word here for glory is kabod. We don't have time to take a deep dive into all that it means, but let me say this at a very cursory, surface level, that when we typically see God, the scriptures talking about God's glory coming, God's glory being revealed, God's glory filling a building, what it's really talking about is God's what? Presence. It's always about the presence, the nearness, the reality of God filling a certain people or place. And so if we just kind of leave it there and don't go any deeper than that, well, I wish we could, then it seems that Haggai is saying, and that God is saying through prophet Haggai, in the midst of circumstances, in the midst of a season that seems, yes, like nothing. It seems like a death of sorts. It seems like it's just a whole bunch of letting go. And if we know anything about that, these last 18 months have been a whole lot about that, haven't there? A whole lot of letting go. A whole lot of, okay, and then I let go of this, and then I said goodbye to that person, and then I listened. I mean, how many of you know that? It's like we've been shaken, letting go, letting go, letting go. That in the midst of that, when God seems what? Absent. When God seems what? Distant. All of those things. It's as if the prophet's saying, if you stick with it, the glory days are actually yet to come. The best is yet to come. We've said that before as a community, haven't we? That's the hope. That what is before them will actually be greater and more glorious than what's behind them. And that God's glory, Shekinah, God's presence is going to come even closer, even be more resplendent than it was before. And so maybe this community that Haggai is speaking to and writing to in these difficult seasons and circumstances, maybe what they needed at that time was a bigger imagination for what could be, for what God might do. If they look back at what was, if they're constantly looking back, oh yeah, it used to be like this, and we used to have this, and we used to be so powerful, and we used to have all this land and all of those things, they're going to get stuck in the same old comparison game that goes where? Nowhere. And they can do that. But if they have a bigger imagination, if they let those glory days die, and they let go, and they allow a new imagination to take shape, if they allow something new to be born, then maybe, just maybe, the prophet is right. It'll actually be greater. It'll actually be more glorious, because that's just how it works. It's a pattern that's woven into the very fabric of creation. It's a letting go and it's a picking up. It's a death and it's a resurrection. And that resurrection's always more glorious, isn't it? And maybe that's what you and I need today. I don't know, maybe you're here today and you're looking at that screen, you're like, I need a bigger imagination. I need a new imagination for what might actually be possible in my life, in my kids' lives, in my marriage, in my job, whatever it might be, in my neighborhood. I don't know about you, but I am, and I'll use this language, I am absolutely clinging to these covenant promises in this season of life. Like clinging to promises. Notice my language. Shattered but not fully restored, which means I'm clinging to what? Promises of what will be. That is a very difficult place to be in at times, isn't it? Some days, I don't know about you, but I look at the world, I look at society, I look at everything that's gone on, especially these last few years, and how shattered, how broken things are, how so much of it even seems that it's broken beyond repair, right? But how is this going to get fixed? How is this going to get solved? How on earth is this ever going to get restored and redeemed? Anybody feel like that? You're just like, what on earth? And in those moments, all I can cling to is where the prophet lands this teaching. And it's verse 9 at the very end. And in this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord Almighty. Some days that's all I can cling to, is a promise for what? Peace. And in this place, wherever that is, wherever I feel shattered or broken, there will be peace. Can I tell one story? I know we're getting on. Rainier, come on up. Look at the boss. Can I tell one story? This week, I found myself in one of those moments with a junior high student. At the end of a chapel service, I was just standing in the back of a gymnasium, and this student came up to me and said, "Will you pray for me?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, I am so depressed. I am so anxious. Will you pray for me? And there was just this I don't know how else to talk about it other than a presence, a glory. It was standing somewhere in between us. And I said, "Sweetie, can I ask, how long has this been going on, or where does this come to?" And she said, "I don't know, it probably goes back to the sexual abuse as a child." And then she just kept going. And I sat there in that moment looking at this, 13-year-old girl. And I am clinging to promises for her future. She's shattered. I mean, she's literally tears pouring down her cheeks, shattered, broken. I'm like, "Lord, why?" This feels like beyond repair. And all I could do in that moment, as we bowed our head, was to ask for the presence of God to come, to fill this young girl before me with his glory, and to say, in that place, I declare peace. Because that peace that the prophet's speaking about is wholeness. It's restoration. It's shalom. It's things as they were intended to be. I said to her, "This was never supposed to happen to you. I am so sorry this happened to you. This is the absence of God. This is the, I wouldn't fault you if you want." I mean, all of these things are happening in the midst of the back of a gymnasium in this moment. And all I could do internally, and I looked at her and I said, "Yes, this may be your past. This does not have to be your future. I declare peace over your life. I cling to the promises. I know this is going to take a lot of work." And we had just this moment. And that's what I was clinging to in that moment. Because peace, let me be clear, it is not the absence of shattered screens. Peace is not the absence of bad things happening to people. It's not that. Peace is not the absence of strife or stress or conflict. Peace is the overwhelming presence of the glory of God in the midst of all of that. And there's a big difference. It's looking the teenager in the eye who is sharing something with you and being able to pronounce peace in the midst of just absolute devastation and brokenness. And that is the hope. That is the hope that the prophet offers. And that's all I can offer you today if you find yourself in that kind of place, is that peace. And so Rainier's going to play and kind of center us for a time of ministry. Abigail's going to come in a few minutes. I want to put a few questions that, we've been circulating. And some of you are finding these, I know, vastly, very, very helpful as a way of reflecting on some of what we're teaching through. And I know it can be heavy at times. And so it's good just to slow down and say, "Holy Spirit, what are you saying to me in these moments?" And so let me put a few questions on the board, or on the screen. You can tell I'm a teacher. Put a few questions on the board. Question 1, where are the places where you need the Lord to grant peace, wholeness, restoration, the way it was? Where do you need that right now in your life? Is there an area? Or maybe it's for someone else. Yeah, so maybe for me, I don't know, today it's for this young girl that I was able to pray with. Lord, grant peace there. And then finish the sentence. Lord, I trust that you can make, and then What is it? Even greater or more glorious than it was before? Is there something that, looking back, you're like, yeah, there was a time, and right now it seems a bit like nothing. It's a little lackluster. It's got some warps and some, it's all right. But I'm trusting. I'm clinging to the promises. This could be even greater, more glorious than it was before, if I'll stick it with the pattern. And then 3, what might you need to let go of? For what you just wrote down to even be possible. Yeah, there may be a letting go, right? I'm going to let go of that expectation. I'm going to let go. I thought that child was going to go that way. I'm letting go of that right now. Do even more. So Holy Spirit, would you come and fill this room with your presence, your glory? Would you come? Would you tend to the places in us, in those we love, that may feel shattered and broken and in disarray, that may feel like nothing, that may seem right now like nothing? And we cling to your promises for something greater, even more glorious. Show us what we need to let go of. Where does there need to be a death of sorts in order for there to be new life, resurrection, a new dream, a new opportunity, something new to grow, something beautiful to come from the ash? Show us what that is today. So Rainier's going to play. I'll take a few minutes, write some stuff down, and then Abigail's going to come and kind of just lead us in a time of corporate ministry together. We really want to be sensitive to whatever the Spirit is doing and saying to you today. We don't want to just rush through. We want to be sensitive and be able to bless some of you who need prayer today. Maybe you find yourself in the place like a 8th grade girl at a Christian school.